You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, writer for Sports Illustrated for various SEC-related things. But on this podcast, we take a dive into all things Kentucky athletics. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be joining Isaac Schade, host of the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, to discuss Kentucky's run in the Global Jam this past week. Obviously, Wildcats go 4-0 in the round robin. A lot of expectations, I think, are being set on the Wildcats after a very impressive stretch of play against, quite frankly, much better competition than they faced just a season ago internationally. So we're going to dive into that conversation with Isaac Schade here in just a moment. Just to let you guys know, I am broadcasting live from SEC Media Days, going to be here all week. Hopefully we'll get some thoughts and notes from Mark Stoops and the players as they make their way through, I believe, on Wednesday. That'll be some interesting conversation later on this week. But for now, let's go ahead and kick it to our conversation with the one and only Isaac Schade.
Man, always great to be joined by our guy Lance Dawe, the host of Locked On Kentucky Wildcats. And Lance, it feels like this offseason we've been talking perhaps even more so than normal because the Kentucky roller coaster has been some kind of fun thing to ride, but it's kind of felt like that roller coaster that dude saw a crack in a couple weeks ago, because at any moment it seemed like this thing could derail. But we are talking coming right off of Kentucky's gold medal win at the 2023 Global Jam games. They were wearing their Kentucky uniforms, but representing the US of A, going up against Germany and Canada and Dawe Select, the Basketball Africa League. And Lance, Kentucky goes 4-0 at this tournament up in Canada. Just a big picture general question to start off. What did we learn about the Wildcats from these four games?
Well, the first thing I want to point out here, just as a shot towards another college basketball program, Baylor went 1-4 in this Global Jam last season, and the boys in blue went 4-0. So automatic dub there. Congrats to Baylor for posing a losing record here. But yeah, what did we learn from this team? I think we learned that this team is a lot better than we expected them to be. When you talk about what Kentucky's roster looks like this offseason, you and I have discussed it several times here on your show. It's a lot of inexperience. It's a lot of question marks. It's a lot of thoughts about how is this team going to gel once they actually get to play some basketball. Right. And I think that these teams that Kentucky went up against were significantly better than what they faced in the Bahamas just a season ago. And I think a lot of people would agree with that. The chemistry that these Wildcats had, they didn't turn the ball over a lot. They very clearly shared the ball, I think, at a level that even I would have never expected with a fully healthy Kentucky team. It was a selfless, impressive, efficient outing for Kentucky in all four games that they played. And I am very impressed with just the maturity that this young squad seemed to have shown throughout all of these games. DJ Wagner, Antonio Reeves, Reed Shepard, all of these different guards that I had questions about in terms of how are they going to handle the ball with each other. Rob Dillingham, very ball-dominant guards. And again, like I mentioned a minute ago, they shared the rock so well. I mean, they distributed very well. And without your two bigs, I think Kentucky looked about as good as they possibly could. And I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, Kentucky's winning the national championship. Oh, they're going to go 40-0 next season, hang another banner. But Isaac, you and I have been discussing throughout this offseason just how disappointing things have been with Coach Cal and with how Kentucky has handled themselves. I think this was a very much so needed breath of fresh air for Big Blue Nation to get to see their team as a whole, all the different random parts that they feel like they've kind of scrounged together here to late. They worked really, really well. And it's something that I think the Kentucky fans will be excited about here for the next coming months. Obviously, injuries and things, kind of giving Kentucky pause here and there. But, man, did these guys look better than I thought they would.
And that is always an encouraging thing, even if it is in the middle of the summer. Lance, you made, a nice little jab there at Waco and Coach Drew. Shouts to our guy Drake Toll, the host of Locked On Baylor. But it's kind of funny because Coach Cal, maybe in his kind of tongue-in-cheek, sandbaggy Coach Cal sort of way, hinted at before this tournament that maybe Kentucky wouldn't win a game. And instead, the 0 is not in the win column, but in the loss column. Do you think this is just a case of typical Coach Cal sandbagging, or do you think there was legitimacy to him suggesting that they might not do well in the tournament?
I think you have to look at and you understand this, Isaac. Look at what was going on heading into this. Yeah. Kentucky at one point here just a few weeks ago had 7 scholarship players, right? They were thin. And they were searching for answers. They picked up a couple of 3 stars. People melted down about it. You get a transfer in Trey Mitchell, who I think has been an incredibly valuable addition to this team. And I think he showed it time and time again through the 4 different games that Kentucky played. He's going to be a very fun stretch big for the Wildcats. Big time pickup. There was a lot of negativity surrounding Coach Cal and heading into this offseason, obviously, because of the loss to St. Peter's a couple of seasons ago and the round of 32 exit this season. There's just so much going against Kentucky, and you look at the roster immediately heading into it. Sure, you picked up a couple of pieces, but Aaron Bradshaw's hurt. Your starting center, Ugonna Onyenso. Oh, looks like he's not going to be able to go throughout this entire tournament. He's in crutches. And so I think Cal setting the expectation of, hey, look, don't expect us to do anything in this game, in these games. We're young, we're learning. And I think the biggest thing we're coming out of this is, can we focus on our positive state of mind? Can we focus on getting better through these first 4 games before we actually get into legitimate play in November? And I think that was a realistic, understandable expectation. Now, did he know something that we didn't know? Did he know that, we're still going to go out there and dominate these guys because of our athleticism or XYZ? Sure, maybe. But to only have 8, 9, 10 practices underneath your belt without your 2 bigs heading into this one against much better competition than you faced last year,
that's right.
I think that the expectations that he spoke of were realistic. And I continue to harp on those throughout the Global Jam, even after the first couple of games, where I'm just like, okay, sure, Antonio Reeves shot 50+% from 3. Sure, Kentucky just body bagged them on offense, but they're not going to do that this entire tournament. And then they proceeded to do it the entire round robin. I mean, I'm genuinely surprised by it. And to be honest with you, I think Cal was coming into this with probably a little bit of, okay, let's try and set the stage for these fans so that they don't melt down whenever things potentially go bad. Because I genuinely do believe in his mind and in the coaching staff's mind, hey, look, we're down players, we're young, this could go bad.
Well, and Lance, you just talked about it being down players, particularly, that's a tough word to say on them early in the week, Ugonna Onyenso and Aaron Bradshaw. And so, listen, I know there had been like weeping and gnashing of teeth when Sheboy decided to stay in the draft, when Hunter Dickinson chose Kansas instead of Kentucky. And, it's like, what is this front court going to be? Thank goodness we've got Bradshaw coming in. Thank goodness we've got Onyenso deciding not to transfer after all. But then both of those guys are missing. Thank goodness for Trey Mitchell. And so, Lance, how, eventually Onyenso is going to be healthy. Eventually Bradshaw is going to be healthy. Do you forecast that will be a help to the front court when those guys are back? Or do you think it muddies up what feels like now a much more formidable front court?
Well, this is something that we're probably going to talk about a little bit more in depth on the show here in just a minute, but you watch the way this offense operated with Trey Mitchell at the 5, and something that we've continued to discuss, and fans of my show very much so understand, Kentucky fans very much so understand, this offense has been brutal to watch at times under Coach Cal, and the lack of adjustments and transition to, I think, a modern style approach to the game, an Alabama style approach to the game, where you just go 5 out, you spread them, and you let the athletes run, get to the rim, kick it out, and shoot it. You didn't really see a whole lot of that, even with players that over the past couple of seasons, the Wildcats probably could have done that very well with. And so heading into this with Trey Mitchell at the 5, it forced Kentucky to do some interesting things. And I think with him at that position, it allowed Kentucky to open things up and play a lot more loose and play a lot more fun. With Onyenso and Bradshaw back in this lineup, I don't think that changes. I don't, because I don't expect Kentucky to hold these guards back from the style of play that makes them their best. I don't think that DJ Wagner and Antonio Reeves and Reed Shepherd And all of these guys are going to be comfortable sitting in the top style of offense that Cal had even a season ago.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to do that. I think he understands what he has. And so he's going to make his bigs adjust to that. If you're going to play 2 7-footers in your lineup primarily for defense, which is awesome, great, please do that, because there was no defense played during the Global Jam from Kentucky. I would expect him to try and get them to acclimate to what the rest of the team is going to end up being really good at. And listen, we heard Cal a lot last year say, hey, we need this team to shoot more threes. We need this team to be a little bit more outside oriented. And then we didn't really see it. I think this year he's been saying it. I think we're going to see it. And I think Onyenso and Bradshaw are not going to hinder that. I think defensively they will add a lot to this rotation. And so, yes, I foresee them coming into this lineup with Trey Mitchell. It's certainly going to help the Wildcats down low. We need a guy like Onyenso to help us protect the rim consistently. And I think that Kentucky only gets better, and they don't change their style of play.
Man, it makes me just really curious to see what minutes allocation is going to look like.
Yeah.
Like, what is the starting front court? Who, do we essentially get 6 guys that are getting starters minutes, regardless of who the first 5 are? Can Trey Mitchell slide to the 4 and let Onyenso or Bradshaw be man, it's just going to be really interesting to see how Kentucky works at figuring out all those alignments. And man, we're going to get to see a lot of that come November. Now, Lance, I know there's not too much that, you gotta kind of look at these summer tours with a little bit of not chip on your shoulder. That's not the phrase I'm looking for. You can't put too terribly much stock into it, but there are certainly things we can learn and take away as we look to the season ahead. So I want to ask Lance about some of that, and we'll do so in just a second. But first, this episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who's going to hit the first home run in any baseball game. I'll go ahead and tell you right now, it's Ronald Acuna Jr. All coming at you on an app that's safe, secure, and it's super easy to use. Beyond that, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So folks, sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Folks, we are joined today by Lance Dawe, the host of the Locked On Kentucky Wildcats, very graciously coming to us from the midst of SEC Media Days, getting into some football action there. So make sure you check out all the great information coming out of that event, including all of Greg Sankey's wacky wildness that we will learn more about in the days to come. So, Lance, we had Antonio Reeves as the no-doubter MVP of this Global Jam event. And it starts to make me think, you look at, as you talked about, what Kentucky was just, even a couple weeks ago, looking at scholarships and who's there and who wasn't. And then Antonio Reeves decides to come back. Kind of like, who knew, right? Like that hung in the balance for so long. And then Bob Huggins, the head coach at West Virginia, continues to just make unfortunate life decisions that have put West Virginia in peril, but their loss is Kentucky's game, as we've just talked about with Trey Mitchell. So here's my question. If you could imagine a world with me in which Antonio Reeves doesn't come back and Trey Mitchell isn't part of this roster and is still at West Virginia, how different do you think things would look right now? What conversation would we be having about how Kentucky just did at this event?
Well, that's not a world I want to live in, first off, Isaac. That's not a world I want to see with Kentucky. So Trey Mitchell, I think, if Huggins didn't do what happened there with West Virginia and things did not start to kind of fall apart with some of their transfer portal players coming in and out and heading back into the transfer portal, I think that we would see Kentucky probably lose a couple of games here in the Global Jam. And I think Trey Mitchell, statistically, I mean, you look at what he did. He was a 44% three-point shooter throughout this event. He was the third leading scorer, actually tied for second, but third in scoring here. He was third in assists. He was first in blocks. He was also, I believe, fourth in steals. I mean, he did everything. He did everything at the 5 and occasionally at the 4 for Kentucky. So having him and his versatility, I know it's a cliche word, but I truly do. If you go and watch this Global Jam, Trey Mitchell, excuse me, Mitchell did everything. He did everything from, running the pick and pop effectively with DJ Wagner and Reed Shepherd, from, playing hard on the defensive end despite only being 6'9". He's played a little center before, Isaac, and clearly he looked comfortable out there doing so at the 5. I think Kentucky without him would have had to have played Jordan Burks, the 6'9" former small forward during OTE. They would have had to play him at the 5, and quite frankly, I don't think that would have gone over very well. I'm very, very glad that Kentucky was able to get him on the court and was able to just plug and play him. And I think that's what he's going to be this offseason. Whenever they run practice, he's going to continue to get better at that. And then whenever you get into the season, I don't know if he's going to start for this team. He could easily play the 4. Absolutely. You mentioned that earlier. I think he could absolutely play at the 4. Especially with Bradshaw being out, if he's not able to go these first few games of the non-con slate. But I think that he will come in, he'll get his minutes, and I think he's going to be a pretty efficient player. I mean, the way that they want to utilize him, straightaway threes, pick and pop action, rolling to the basket just a little bit, play on the defensive end hard, find guys. He had some excellent passes in this event. I was very impressed with some things that he did in the half court. With guys cutting to the rim. So overall, I think just a very versatile, talented, and knowledgeable player. You can tell just based on the way that he and Reeves played throughout this event. And obviously you asked about Reeves as well, potentially not coming back. We'll slide to him now. Those two guys played like they knew what they were doing. And obviously the team as a whole, they balled out, they scored, but you could tell based on the communication, based on the signaling, based on how they were talking in the huddle, these guys knew what was going on, and they were able to kind of relay that to these freshmen who were kind of getting their first game action together as a complete team. Obviously, we saw DJ Wagner step up in a big way. Obviously, we saw Reed Shepherd. I'm not discounting them just because they're freshmen. What I'm sitting here saying is if you go back and watch it, you can tell just based on the way that they were operating on the court and based on the way that they were operating in between plays, they were the experienced veteran guys that I think Kentucky needed for this roster this upcoming season. So you say, what would the world look like? I think there would be a lot less direction. I think there would be a lot less consistency. You wouldn't have a big man. And then with Antonio Reeves, you wouldn't be getting those buckets, because what Antonio Reeves did in these 4 games was just incredibly impressive. He was the leading scorer, averaged 23 points per game. He went from 3 of 7 from 3 to 3 of 6 from 3 to 8 of 11 in the third game. And I kept saying on my show, well, he's going to cool down. Okay, well, he shot better, a little bit better. He's going to cool down. 8 of 11 from 3. He's going to cool down. And it wasn't just the threes, Isaac. It was the tough mid-range jumpers that experienced players, whenever they get to their spots, they know what to do. He was able to knock them down consistently. Just a tough shot maker. If you didn't have Trey Mitchell, you wouldn't have a big man that was incredibly versatile. And if you didn't have Antonio Reeves, you wouldn't have the leadership and you wouldn't have that scoring. Those are the 2 things that he's going to bring to this team this year. And by golly, I'm glad that he is with the Wildcats.
Well, West Virginia was very kind to Kentucky in the previous couple of years with Oscar Tshiebwe, and it seems like that is the case again in the form of Trey Mitchell, and Antonio Reeves is picking up right where he left off at the end of last season. Lance, here's my last question for you. I alluded to it coming out of the last segment, but I know we have to be careful with not putting too much stock into what we take away from these type of events. But there are definitely things to be learned. So at the big picture level, as we think about the season ahead, what are your updated expectations for this Kentucky team after having seen these 4 games?
Well, I think it definitely raises their floor. I think that the Wildcats are in a unique position with the way that they have built this roster. We've talked about this offseason is the negative aspect of it. It's a very young team. How are they going to gel? Does that mean postseason success? And Cal, throughout this Global Jam, it's interesting the way that he kind of carried himself, the way he talked about it. Just explaining that he feels comfortable. This is something that he's familiar with. He can run stuff like he used to. He can talk to the kids like he used to. And I don't know if that's necessarily going to translate to 30 wins. I don't necessarily know if it's going to translate to a national championship, but I think Kentucky fans should feel more comfortable about the floor of this team, not completely bottoming out, because they have shooters, they have offense, they have confidence. And I think if you start to build some of that chemistry, you're going to find yourself in a good position come March. And obviously it's difficult to predict what any team can do in the NCAA tournament. But as far as adjusting my expectation, I think the floor of this team in the SEC and the floor of what this team could do in the postseason has been raised, because I was genuinely impressed. Like I said at the beginning of the show, genuinely impressed with the way that this team collectively came together and ran their stuff, at least on the offensive end of the floor. You start to build a little bit of that chemistry. You start to build a little bit between these guards and get that front court back. Kentucky can be a very dangerous team. They can be a very dangerous team.
Should be another exciting year in the SEC, and hopefully for Big Blue Nation's sake, it will not be one that goes the way of the past couple years. Lance Dawe, thank you so much for joining us. As always, massive congrats to you. Just past 5,000 subscribers on YouTube. What a big turning point. What a big deal that is. Congrats, man. Keep up the great work yourself.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on, man. All right, that was our conversation with Isaac Shade of the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Again, really appreciate him breaking down the Wildcats stretch in the Global Jam. Obviously, we're going to be talking about it throughout the week just to kind of get our final thoughts post-Global Jam about what we saw out of the different individual players. Didn't talk about Justin Edwards. Did not talk about Reed Shepherd there on the during the interview, so we're definitely going to break down what we saw from those two individual players again throughout the week. Broadcasting live at SEC Media Days. Really appreciate everybody out there listening. If you have not subscribed to the podcast already, please go ahead and do so. If you're listening on YouTube as well, I would greatly appreciate a sub there. And I just want to say thank you so much to everybody who reached out congratulating the channel on 5,000 subscribers. I want to thank you guys so much for subscribing and joining the ride here, as we have kind of made this journey way quicker than I would have ever expected. I said that I believe back in February or January, actually, that I wanted to get the channel to 5K before November, before the beginning of college basketball season. And you guys knocked it out of the park. So again, I can't thank you guys enough. I really appreciate everybody that has subbed and has kind of joined the channel here as we've continued to go through what has been a very tumultuous and rocky offseason for John Calipari and the Wildcats. So again, can't thank you guys enough. And here's to 5,000 subscribers post what has been a very awkward and rocky year thus far for UK. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On UK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDaw_, and you can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.